talk, one of the things that I really tried to highlight is that since 9/11, our country has really been in a collective state of post-traumatic stress disorder. And after 9/11, there was a fracturing of communities and trust in one another that has really impacted the world that anyone under the age of 20 has grown up in. And now with climate change on the horizon, there's been this pre-traumatic stress disorder that we've all dealt with. And so having those bookends has made it really difficult to be resilient in general. And now here we are in the midst of a global pandemic. And the reality is our ability to tolerate distress as a culture is not very strong. And we expect that young people are going to demonstrate something different than what's been modeled for them. So I feel really passionate about talking about resiliency, because when I ask adults how many people are proud, reasonably proud of their ability to manage stress, very few will say that they are. And we have to understand that young people are not going to learn, that we're not born with resiliency. They have to learn by seeing it modeled for them. So that's what we're really going to be talking about today. And this is being hosted by the Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented, because a lot of what I talk about is directed at people who are gifted and therefore highly sensitive and intense. But what often happens at the end of my talks is people will come up to me and say, wow, this information is really appropriate to anyone. So I hope, whether or not you are identified as gifted or have children that are identified as gifted, that you will find value in this regardless. So I want to start, if you've ever seen me talk or you know me at all, you know that I've been heavily influenced by Brene Brown in my personal and professional work. And this slide is going to come later in the talk where I'm going to talk about it in a more general way. But suffice it to say that when she released her podcast shortly after the quarantine started, and she talked about FFTs, which is what I am experiencing right now, and I will explain what that is, it really resonated with me. And she has very colorful language, so I will let you do your own research or imagining about what the first F stands for, but for purposes of tonight, we're going to call them terrible first times. And she talked about how when we are going through terrible first times, there are three things that we really need to do to normalize our discomfort. So that's why I begin by telling you, this is really hard for me. It feels uncomfortable, and I'm sure any of you who were in this position would feel uncomfortable and probably have been doing Zoom meetings or whatever it is that you've been doing online. Or if you haven't been doing anything online, I'm sure you understand that feeling of, I don't know what I'm doing. This is new for me. I'm not sure how to move through this. The second thing we need to do is put things into perspective. So I said to myself, you know what? This is not a life or death situation. I'm offering information and hopefully it will be well received. And I've done talks many times before and I've enjoyed them. So I'm putting things in perspective and setting realistic expectations for myself, that I'm going to do the best I can and recognize that I'm probably going to be nervous for longer than usual because I don't have human beings to look at and connect with. So today is my FFT, and we'll get more into that later. Brene Brown also talks a lot about comparative suffering, and I think that's one of the things that I have seen a lot of my private therapy clients struggling with, as well as myself, my yoga students, my friends and family that I've spoken to. But this experience has really lent itself to us comparing what our experience is as compared to someone else's. Social media has provided a great stage for that. And the reality is that there are diverse quarantine experiences. I personally have been minimally impacted by the quarantine because I'm a private therapist. All of my clients have willingly come to telehealth with me, and therefore I'm just executing my daily life from home with a 14-year-old daughter who really takes much better care of herself than I probably do on most days. And I have not been overly stressed, but I'm still experiencing stress. And it's important that I allow myself to feel that and not constantly be saying, yeah, but look at all these other people who are struggling. Empathy is not finite. We can have empathy for ourselves, and it doesn't mean we don't have any to offer other people. It's also the case that when we're looking at other people, we don't have to compare and say, well, you don't have a right to feel upset or stressed out because you don't have this situation that this person has. And when we do that, we are further fracturing the connection that was already fractured in the post-traumatic stress disorder of 9/11. What we need to be doing is offering each other and ourselves empathy, because as Brene Brown says, every time we honor our own struggle and the struggles of others by responding with empathy, the healing that results affects us all. Now, there's a poem that I love called Brief for the Defense by a wonderful poet named Jack Gilbert. And in this poem, he says, if we deny our happiness and resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. And he's referring to people who are suffering. So if we deny our happiness and resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. And he goes on to say, we must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. That is an important sentence to me, and one that I am constantly reminding myself and people around me of. That when we are going through pain, when we are going through things that we know other people are suffering through, that does not mean that we should not enjoy our lives. And I'll get more into that in a minute. But shortly into this quarantine, I saw somebody on Facebook had posted that we are going through withdrawal from the emotional addiction of the myth of certainty. And that hit me square between the eyes, because it's not just certainty, it's control. And one of the things that I often talk about is that we are such a productivity and achievement-based society, and that's our control. In a world that feels very out of our control, what we can do is be productive. And so we always lean into tasks and things that we can control, and we plan and we set goals. And all of a sudden, our world came to a screeching halt. And now we don't have the ability to be certain about anything. We have very few opportunities to make plans right now beyond a week or so from now, because we don't have control over what's going to happen. And this quote from Anne Lamott, she continues on and says, certainty is missing the point entirely. That faith includes noticing the mess, the emptiness and discomfort, and letting it be there until some light returns. So this idea that faith, the opposite of faith is doubt, is not true. The opposite of faith is certainty, which we don't have. So we have to lean into faith, whatever that looks like for us. And this is because emotions are contagious. So you're probably all recognizing that in your homes, that no matter how much you love your family members, we are constantly recycling our emotional experiences. And we can impact people up to 3 degrees of separation. So when we are impacting our partners and then they're going onto Zoom meetings with their coworkers, they're potentially impacting those coworkers. And when our children are going on to FaceTime with their friends, they're potentially impacting them, and vice versa when they get off those calls and come back to us. Because emotions spread like secondhand smoke. So we have a responsibility to ourselves and to the people around us to remember we live in 2 worlds. We live in an inside world and we live in an outside world. And we have no control or certainty about the outside world, but the inside we do. The inside belongs to us. And when our thoughts are primarily influenced by our outside world, we are somehow telling ourselves that it's more important than the inside. So this, what you see in front of you, is the cognitive triangle that shows us that our thoughts greatly influence our overall emotional state. And the way that this has come up during this pandemic in the work that I've been doing is I had a young client who told me that she was really scared about where this was going to go. This was early on in the quarantine. And I asked her to share with me what the worst case scenario was that she could think of. And she shared it with me. And then I asked her, okay, how does your body feel when you have those thoughts in your mind? And she told me, and not surprisingly, it was tense and uncomfortable and fearful. And then I said, imagine the best case scenario. And she did. And she told me what that was. And I asked her how her body felt thinking about the best case scenario. And it was markedly different. And I invited her to consider the fact that we have no idea where this is going. We have no idea. It changes every day. And yes, in some respects, there have been worst case scenarios that we've already experienced. But overall, every day we have an opportunity to decide what we're going to lean into, whether it's hope, which is not sunshine and rainbows. The definition of hope that I really subscribe to is Senator Cory Booker's, which is simply that hope is the active conviction that despair will not have the final word. So when we lean into that, we markedly change our inner landscape, and that is incredibly important. And I'm going to get into that in the next slide, but for right now, I want to share with you another thing that a friend of mine, Melissa Carey, who I don't know if she's on right now, but she's a fellow yoga teacher, and I took her yoga class the first week of quarantine online. and we were doing balance poses. And she said, remember that balance is a verb. And I went, oh my gosh, we're always talking about seeking balance, but balance is a verb. And when we seek to balance, I'm standing on one foot right now in case you can't tell, I'm sure you can't. We're in and out of steadiness, right? We wobble and then we find steadiness, and we wobble and we find steadiness. And if when we wobble, we go, oh my God, I'm going to fall, chances are we're going to fall. But if we wobble and we trust that we'll find our way back to steadiness, that is not being a wide-eyed optimist. That is choosing what the internal landscape of our body is going to feel like. So the first step towards learning how to deal with something is to not reject it. And what I have found a lot during this pandemic is people really rejecting the idea that we are going through something hard, or that we should be going through something hard, or that we deserve to be going through something hard, or that it is as hard as we believe it to be. This is our reality. There is no pause button pressed. We are living our real life every day. We're not waiting to go back to it. Things are evolving as they have throughout history. Humanity has evolved and adapted. We're in the middle of it right now. And we have to lean into that. Because every time that we reject our reality, we are expending unnecessary energy that we could be using to deal with the task in front of us. So as reality is unfolding in front of us, when we have waves of panic, we cannot recoil as though we just put our finger on a hot stove. Because if you leave your finger on a hot stove, yes, it's going to do serious damage. But feeling panic, feeling sadness, feeling the difficult feelings that emerge as we move through this, those are not going to cause serious damage. In fact, letting that energy move through you is incredibly important. So one thing that I recently learned, we know that when our body is triggered into a stress response, there is a flooding of the stress hormone cortisol. And I recently learned that our tears actually contain cortisol, because when we cry, our body is releasing cortisol. And I know many people who resist crying for many reasons, not the least of which is feeling like you're going to fall apart and not be able to put yourself back together. That's where hope comes in. That's where faith comes in, that you're going to be okay, that you are strong enough to feel what you need to feel and let it move through you. Because when you don't, and you keep yourself in that constant state of stress, our body ends up having wear and tear that causes what's called allostatic load, which means that we start to have brain fog, we're exhausted all the time, because we are constantly recycling this stress response. And when our body is stressed, I'm going to take Dan Siegel's model of the brain for a moment. Dan Siegel, who wrote Brainstorm and The Whole Brain Child, talks about if my fingers represent the prefrontal cortex, which is where our problem solving skills lie, our critical thinking, really important things, impulse control. When we are in a stress response, we lose connection to that, and we're run by our amygdala. It's like losing a wireless signal. So I hear from all these people, I don't know why I can't be more productive. I can't get things done. I'm so tired all the time. It's because we are spending so much energy being here. And if instead, when we feel those waves of panic, we're able to settle into them. So we often say, settle down, calm down. And I don't know how you feel about that, but when people tell me to calm down, it generally does the opposite. And I think that's a fairly universal response, that if it were that easy to calm down, we just would. So what we need to learn how to do is settle into our feelings. Instead of settling down, we settle in. We let ourselves feel the wave of panic. We take a moment to let it pass so that we can re-engage the prefrontal cortex and then problem solve. There are a lot of tasks at hand. I'm not suggesting that you sit around and think about what you're feeling all the time. But what I am suggesting is that we not recoil from difficult feelings and turn towards distraction and numbing as constant tools. That instead we learn to use whatever tools we have at our fingertips that help us. Now, people are always asking me for skills, and I'm happy to offer skills, but the reality is what works for one person isn't going to work for another. And being a yoga teacher, a lot of people come to me and say, oh, you're going to suggest meditation and yoga. I know. And if that doesn't work for you, me suggesting that isn't going to help. Those are my tools, but mindfulness practice is about how you learn to be in your body in the moment of your current reality without trying to escape it. Because as John Kabat-Zinn, the father of mindfulness, says, mindfulness is about being mindfulness is about being in love with being alive, not being in love with your life. Because being in love with your life would imply you're in love with the external circumstances of your life. Being in love with being alive means you are willing to feel whatever you feel and allow the moments to unfold in front of you and embrace them. Because the ways that we cope are more often, other than distraction and numbingness, trying to be productive, trying to have control. And I'm hearing a lot of conflicts are happening in homes because of this. People are trying to control each other. They're trying to control themselves. They're pushing themselves to do more than they have the capacity to. And if you haven't seen any of the literature that's come out since the beginning of the quarantine, that's around the difference between having time versus capacity, that's what we're talking about. That allostatic load, that wear and tear on your physiological and psychological systems, your nervous system, is going to compromise your ability to function. And while I don't encourage you to be trying to be productive right now, I'm also aware that there are things people have to do. There are people out there who are working every day, some who are leaving the home to work, raising children and trying to do that at the same time as working. There are people trying to figure out how to pay their bills. We have to have the energy to be able to do these things in order to be able to adapt and move through this experience. And if we're paralyzed by fear, and if we stuff our feelings, what ends up happening is they're going to erupt at some point. And that's when we tend to lash in or lash out. So when you're thinking about what do I do, because I know that's why people have tuned in here, is what do I do? It's about finding the things that you can do in your life that keep you present, that keep you from spinning off into fears about worst case scenarios, that keep you from spinning off into worries about when you need to order your groceries next to make sure that you get toilet paper, or whatever the worries are that start to cause that stress response that paralyzes us. So yes, yoga and meditation help me. And I also go for walks every day because being outside, nature naturally absorbs our cortisol. And when I go outside and I take my field of vision from a screen where I've been seeing clients all day to my house, which is a little bit bigger, to outside, where I see that regardless of any virus, the mountains still look incredible. There's eagles still soaring through the air. The clouds still look incredible. There's people out on bicycles and on walks. And yes, we're wearing masks, but we are living our lives. And we have to let the energy of the emotions that we're experiencing move through us. So what is it for you? Whether it's cooking or sewing or art or going for a walk or playing with your animals or listening to music or screaming into a pillow or taking a shower, whatever it is, being able to be in your body and experience that without spinning off into rabbit holes is really the practice of resilience, because we cannot move through things if we get stuck, resisting emotions, resisting experiences. So one of the ways that we can do that is by talking to our parts. And everyone is probably aware that there's lots of voices in our head, and they are often at odds. And they are often arguing and saying things that are trying to protect us that are really not helpful in the moment and can sometimes feel quite belligerent. But they are all trying to help us. And so when that panic comes up, one of the nice ways to conceptualize how to talk to yourself is thinking about either driving a bus or a van, and they're all parts in the back of the van or the bus, and you have a conversation. You don't scream at them to be quiet and leave you alone, because that will trigger their nervous system, which triggers yours, because they're a part of you. And you can't kick them off the bus because they're part of you. They'll get back on. And you can't just stick in earbuds and try to ignore them because they want your attention. So they'll come and grab the steering wheel. And when that happens, we are not empowered. We are out of control when we let our emotions hijack us. When we can feel them, and when we get back into this place in our brain, we can talk to them and we can talk with them and negotiate with them. So coming back to FFTs, this is your FFT of a global pandemic. This is all of our FFT. So we have to normalize the emotions. We have to get some perspective, and we have to reality check expectations, which her three responses to FFTs happens to be very similar to the model of mindful self-compassion, which is a model that I use a lot in my work based on the work of Christopher Germer and Kristen Neff. And there's 3 components to mindful self-compassion. Mindfulness, which is effectively normalizing discomfort. Mindfulness is, what am I feeling? Not just stressed, not just exhausted, not the easy ones. What am I feeling? Am I scared? Am I hopeless? Do I feel powerless? What is happening for me? Common humanity is the next step, putting things into perspective. I'm not alone in this. Everyone around the globe is trying to figure out how to navigate this global pandemic. Yes, with the diversity that I acknowledged earlier, yet we are all scared. We are all uncertain. We all feel a lack of control. So our feelings are normal. And self-kindness is the same as reality checking expectations. It is kind to yourself to not push yourself beyond your capacity. And so when we use these tools, we're able to constantly bring our brain back into this state so we can more effectively help ourselves and help our families. And lastly, I want to end with the work of Kelly McGonigal. And if you have not seen her TED Talk, I highly recommend it. But Kelly McGonigal is a health researcher and she's a psychologist. And she talks in her TED Talk about how for so many years she's told people to avoid stress because it's bad for us. But what she's realized is stress is only bad for us when we receive it as bad for us. That through her study with Kaiser, which involved over 30,000 people, they discovered that stress-related heart disease that's caused by the constriction of arteries only happens in people who view stress as something that is attacking them. If someone is experiencing the highest levels of stress and recognizes that stress is actually creating the biology of courage, that stress is our body preparing ourselves to do something that we believe and our body believes we can do, the arteries don't constrict. So remembering that stress is what arises when something you care about is at stake. And there's a lot that we care about that's at stake right now. And so that feeling of stress in our bodies is the biology of courage that's giving us the capacity to move through this. If we reject those feelings, if we distract ourselves from them, if we numb ourselves from them, then we aren't developing resilience. We are just muscling through. And I believe that we can do this differently. This is a list of all the works cited and recommended resources that I have mentioned in my talk. I have absolutely no idea how long I've been talking because there's no counter on my screen. So I hope I didn't go over or be too short. And then here is a screen with all of my contact information. I'm going to be taking some questions momentarily. And then at the end of those questions, I'll explain a little bit more about my business and we'll come back to this slide. And here's the work cited once again, if anyone wants to screenshot, or this link will be made available after this Facebook Live presentation. So you'll always be able to come back and access this.
Okay, Jenny, thank you so much.
Sure.
So if you're watching on Facebook right now, we'd love to hear your questions. We're going to field a couple quick questions from the CAGT membership. We sent out an email to our members of our organization earlier in the week to field some questions from them. And so I'm going to read some of those questions now to Jenny, and she will answer them as best she can in the time frame. You know, some of them are pretty lengthy, but I think any advice that Jenny could provide right now is going to be a refresher for all of us. So it did catch me, Jenny, when I was listening to you, when you were talking about whatever relaxes you. It reminded me of a conversation before we started about my shoveling yesterday. Yeah, I had to get some of that angst and frustration out of me. Just had to move some dirt. It felt real good.
Uh-huh.
So, all right, we're going to go ahead and start with a couple questions. The first one's kind of a doozy, but we're gonna give it a go. So this is from Raina Vuleman. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. From Cherokee Trail Elementary School in Parker, and she asks, how can we calm fears about death and dying, particularly during the time of COVID and losing loved ones?
That is a big question. You know, I think Oh, God, that's a really hard question.
Mhm.
So, death and dying is something that scares everybody, not just little guys. And I think it goes back to the conversation earlier about lack of certainty and control. I mean, if there's one thing we are certainly not certain of, it's when we're going to die, when the people we love are going to die, and what happens after death. And so, the topic of death becomes incredibly uncomfortable for people. Um, I think I'm of the belief that we have to, number one, be open to talking about it. I think in my other talk, I talk often or more at length about how when we're asked, how are you in our society, we often just say fine, tired, or stressed. And how, especially for younger kids and young adolescents, it's really important to see the adults in their life learn how to be vulnerable without unabashedly sharing everything. So maybe saying, I'm having a hard day, but it's nothing I want to get into, but thank you for asking. And then we give permission to be more vulnerable. And so when my daughter was young and we would talk about death and dying, I think, it was really about letting her know that I felt scared about it too, and that it's scary to not know with certainty why things happen, when they're going to happen. And then in terms of dealing with the fear, I think it's about teaching young kids and teaching anyone that fear is something that we live with about a lot of things, and we have to learn how to coexist with it. So we can't be paralyzed by fear. We're living our life. We don't know when it's going to end. So that's a really important reason to live our life right now in this moment and value the time that we have. And just like expending energy resisting our emotions or experiences is wasting energy that we could be using on dealing with tasks, being afraid of death and dying is taking energy away from being alive. And that's really how I talk about it. And yeah, just acknowledging that it's scary. I mean, nobody likes to think about or talk about death or dying, but it is part of our life and it's part of the life cycle. I could really do like a whole hour-long presentation on this question, so I hope that answer suffices for now.
That was great. I think as a parent too, that's helpful. I've always kind of gone by the motto of telling my kids as much of the truth as is appropriate for their age level. And I think, being really honest and upfront about those things has helped them process it a little bit better. It's not so mysterious. So
Yeah.
I appreciate your input for sure. Let's see. Okay. How do you help individuals, both young and old, that are seeing no end to this and therefore no reason to blank, do school, get out of bed, do anything?
Mm-hmm. So I somewhat addressed this in my presentation in that this is our life, right? I think when we all entered quarantine, it was like, oh, maybe we'll be inside for 2 weeks. And then that evolved. And I think waiting for the end of this is maybe to our detriment, because as I said, we don't know that there is a finite end. That's not to say we're always going to be in this level of danger or this level of quarantine, but it's not like this is something that's going to get wrapped up in a neat red bow. Our entire way of life is probably going to start to shift slowly but surely, hopefully in positive ways. So I think it, again, wastes energy for us to say, I don't know when this is going to end, so I don't have the energy to do anything. Take yourself to a quiet place or get in the shower or take a bath or go for a walk and sit with the reality that we can't plan. We have no certainty. We don't know when this is going to end. We have to be with that discomfort and learn how to just feel it and not have to cure it, and recognize that we can't wait until we don't feel that way to do the things that we have to do on a daily basis. But again, how can you mitigate your time versus capacity? Because in spite of the fact that I don't want you to be using extra energy wondering when this is going to end, I also want you to be realistic with your expectations of yourself, because we are dealing with something stressful that's compromising our ability to function. You're still muted.
Sorry. Thank you. Hey, it's only going to happen once, this whole thing. I'm going to rock this.
It happens in every Zoom call I've ever been in.
Right? You're muted. I think it's definitely a good reminder to say, we don't have control over when this is going to be over, but we have control on how we enjoy our time right now. So I think that's helpful.
And I also want to just say, Randy, that it's not just about enjoying. I think a lot of people are rejecting this enjoy your time, stay positive message, which I completely understand. It's not about staying positive. It's about continuing to hold hope, like Cory Booker defines, and not letting this pull you under, and just continuing to take the next step, do the next right thing, and remember that you can do hard things, as the great Glennon Doyle reminds us. If you don't know who she is, she's another one like Brene Brown that's been a great influence.
And did she say do the next right thing, or was that Anna in Frozen 2?
I have not seen Frozen 2.
Parents out there who've watched Frozen 2 on repeat for like maybe the last 6 weeks are going to be like, do the next right thing. That's totally Frozen 2.
Yeah, I can't claim that because I haven't seen it yet, but.
Well, I love the saying though. The sentiment is wonderful. Another question has to do with self-care for parents, because I think we're all kind of feeling it right now, especially if we have young ones, or, moody teenagers. So self-care for parents is the toughest for us during this time. We're overseeing schoolwork while working at home. We rarely leave the house. Tension of all this togetherness is starting to wear us all thin. So mom says, we've walked the dogs and take a weekly family field trip with the dogs outdoors, but what else can we do for little bits of self-care? And I think you addressed a lot of those in there. I think, the walks, and it sounds like they're doing that, but yoga, meditation, mindfulness, any other suggestions for self-care? You've addressed a lot of them, so.
I mean, I think, again, this is where people have to say, what is it that rejuvenates me? I work with a program called Sources of Strength. I'm a trainer and facilitator of this program that's national that teaches resiliency and wellness. And so I use that language a lot. Like, what are your sources of strength? What are the things that refuel you and fill you up and help you to continue to move through your day? I'm going to say to all the parents out there, like, it's lovely to spend time with your children, but you need time alone. And you're probably going, oh, that's lovely, Jenny, you have an only child. That must be really easy. And yes, fair. I understand that. But Brene Brown, again, in her podcast, which I highly recommend, called Unlocking Us, she talks about how she and her family sit down every day during this quarantine and use this tool other times as well and say, all right, what percentage do each of us have to give today? And recognize whose percentages are lower than others and who has more to give and who has less to give, and kind of negotiate who's going to take on what that day. And if the numbers don't add up to 100, then there's a family decision that people aren't getting enough sleep, that we need to be eating better. We need to take stock of the way that we are taking care of ourselves. And that might be easier or harder depending on your family and depending on the ages of your children. But at least if you have a partner, you and your partner every day can be establishing what percentage each of you has to give and recognizing what are all of the tasks that need to be accomplished. We all work at home now. But for example, I work at home, but I'm seeing clients. So I'm down in the guest room of my basement, left alone with quiet. Whereas my husband is working upstairs, helping my daughter with school and dealing with anything that comes up upstairs and walking the dog. And so I find it's really important for me when I come up from working to say, what can I take on for you? Even though I've just been working, I've been working in quiet. And my husband and I are about to celebrate 20 years of marriage, which you may not care about, but I'm very proud of. And I am often asked, what is the secret? There's no secret, but I'll tell you that when I can always lean into prioritizing his needs, because I trust that he will always lean into prioritizing mine, then we can trust that both of our needs will get met. And we don't have to be selfish in order to do that. We can just lean into each other and trust that help. So I think it's about communication and really being honest with each other and your family every day. Maybe saying, I don't have the capacity today to make dinner. Can someone else do it?
Yeah.
And just being honest about that so that moms and dads, even if it's 15 minutes in the bathroom, that you're getting some space for yourself.
I've had a few mom friends post pictures of hiding out in the bathroom with a glass of wine and and a book. Yeah. Why not? If it's the only door that locks in the house, use it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to pop over to a Facebook question. We're going to pop back and forth. Kelly asks, how do we help kiddos with low frustration tolerance and low stress tolerance to develop resilience or positive attitudes towards stress, like the growth mindset? But especially when that child has a resistance to demands and activities planned for them. it doesn't respond well to the you can do hard things and like the pep talks. I think she might be talking about my son. How does she know my son? I feel like I get this, you know, he just very low tolerance. And so I understand this question very much. So yeah, how do we bolster our kids and help develop growth mindset in kids that are kind of struggle with resiliency in normal circumstances, possibly?
I love that question. And I appreciate that, no, not everyone is going to respond to pep talks. Absolutely. I really take the message of empowerment with kids, because I think just like with learning goals versus performance goals, we want to look at extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. And if a kid is motivated to deal with their feelings because we want them to, because their feelings are inconvenient for us, or their behavior is inappropriate, or whatever it is that the message that we often send. And I know it's not always intentional, and I do it as a therapist of 20 years, where none of us are perfect. But when we do that, we're effectively sending the message to our children: you need to regulate for me. You need to regulate for the people around you to be more comfortable. Instead of teaching them what would be the benefit to them of learning how to self-regulate, and being able to say, like, gosh, it must be really hard when your big feelings come up like that and it feels like you've been hijacked. And teaching, I find that my younger clients really benefit from the bus metaphor. Teaching them about parts, that you are driving the bus, and one person might get up and start yelling at you that you're going to crash and burn, but you still have to be able to look out the windshield and take stock. Is that really going to happen? Do I really need to listen to this part? And then teach them that, again, they can't kick them off, they can't silence them, and they can't ignore them. Instead, they have to look at those parts and say, I see you. I understand that you feel this way, and I am learning how to respond to things differently. So asking them, what does it feel like when you get so angry or so scared that you kind of explode? And how do you feel afterwards? And really helping them lean into, what would be my internal motivation for learning how to do this differently?
Yeah, I like that. We're trying that tomorrow. Or tonight, depending on how the evening goes. Oh, Kelly says she's glad she's not alone. So
absolutely not.
Me either. I'm super glad I'm not alone. And then your husband, who's watching from upstairs, says someone watching on your page has a question. Can stress and fear manifest as illness?
Oh, absolutely. Because when our body is spending energy to tend to our overly stressed nervous system, it is not expending energy to feed our immune system and our digestive system. In fact, when our amygdala fires and when we're in this state, there's increased blood flow to our arms and our legs and away from our core. And it's the opposite of fight, flight, freeze is called rest and digest, because our body can't rest and digest when it's in fight, flight, or freeze. And that constant flooding of cortisol and adrenaline taxes our body in a way that creates inflammation. And inflammation leads to disease. So absolutely, when we talk about how the inside world belongs to you, that you are responsible for and in control of only one thing in this world, which is how you react to the outside world, it is absolutely part of our responsibility to keep this as healthy as possible and as not stressed as possible, so that our immune system can function as well as it can. So fear and anxiety really play against us in a situation like this, where we need to stay strong and healthy.
That's great. Tanya just tuned in. She says, thanks. She needed to hear that just now. So.
Oh, good.
Yes. I love to be able to help people. Kind of going on that fear and anxiety manifesting as illness. A question from a CAGT member says, what is the best way to directly respond to a child who reports they're not doing well, handling the depression they're going through? And I'm wondering if they didn't leave their name, but I'm wondering if this is an educator who has heard this from a student, but that they're not doing well handling the depression they're going through. So other than reporting out the info to a counselor or a social worker, somebody, kind of in that vein, in the school network who you would report to normally, what else can adults in those children's lives do to support them if they are struggling with depression right now?
So first and foremost, I think I would go into the common humanity piece of mindful self-compassion and let them know that they are not alone in what they're experiencing. I often tell my clients that the greatest gift of being a therapist is that for 20 years, I've had constant daily reminders that I'm not alone in my own emotional experiences. That I'm not a therapist because I never experienced any of this. In fact, I have my own therapist. And I'm not a therapist because I have all the answers. I'm a therapist because I'm human and I really appreciate the struggle of being human. So I think validating that somebody's experience is not isolating is really important, because part of the amygdala response, that stress response, is I'm alone in this. I have to survive. And we can kind of normalize that a bit. And then also, this comes from my sources of strength background, is really looking at people or helping people look at themselves through a strengths-based lens. So yes, you're having a hard time with depression. How is it that you're doing your schoolwork? How is it that you're continuing to get up every day and do the things that you're doing? What are the sources of strength that you already have in your life? And how can I help you find more? You know, do you have family support? Do you have positive friends? Are there any mentors you could lean into? What are the healthy activities you're doing? How can you feel a sense of purpose? You know, the director of the Stanford Center on Adolescence says that the real crisis in growing up today is not stress, it's meaninglessness. So how do we find meaning and purpose in this experience? So we want to offer them resources, certainly, and there's, you know, Colorado Crisis Services, there's the counselors at their school, there's talking to their parents and trusted adults. But I really find, again, that looking through an empowerment lens, helping people see what are they already doing? Because we may feel like we're doing a terrible job, but the reality is, if you are getting up every day and able to function through your day at any level, you're already doing pretty well. And you can always improve. But when we sit around and we say to ourselves, I can't do this, we're compounding our stress. So I would really invite that young person to identify the things that are helping them. You don't even have to use the language helping. Just like, if you're having this hard of a time, how is it that you're doing the things that you're doing? Because presumably if they're on the phone with you, it's because it's the context of school. And that means they're engaged, which means they're doing something to survive. So that's how I tend to
encouraging them to tap into maybe something that's getting them to do something small, but tap into it further.
Yeah.
As a source of strength. Okay. I like that, sources of strength.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
You have talked a lot about existential depression, and I've seen several of your talks about it, and I've really appreciated what you have to share. And a CAGT member asks, it's hard not to feel invisible to the outside world right now. And so how can you, or how do you feel your value during this time? What are some things that, what's some advice you might give to, say, a teen who they tend to experience existential depression, you know, more so in their teen years? How can you encourage teens to maybe find a way to feel value and feel that they have value to the outside world right now? That's a really big question.
Say that again.
It's a really big question.
It is a big question. There's two pieces to it. There's the existential questions and there's the finding value. So let me speak to the existential questions first, which we always have existential questions, right? And right now, I think this pandemic is causing a lot more questioning on that level. The author, Michael Singer, who is kind of a spiritual person, that's why he writes books, so they're spiritual in nature. But I really like how he talks about this, because he says, when we ask those questions, we're seeking control, right? When we ask existential questions, it's because we're feeling like we need certainty. We need answers to really unanswerable questions. And that is continuing to expend energy that we could be using to deal with the moments unfolding in front of us. And it's not to not have empathy for those questions, because I always do and I have them myself. But I think, you know, listening to Mickey Singer's talk on Sounds True that he did at the beginning of the pandemic on resilience, he talks about how it's not our job to understand what's going on right now and why. It's our job to take care of ourselves and take care of each other and our communities. And we can wonder those things, but again, when we expend extra energy on those wonderings and those rabbit holes, we're taking it away from our ability to stay healthy, to stay present, and tend to the things that we need to tend to. As far as value and purpose, I think that really depends from person to person. I mean, I know young people that are trying to be of service to members of their community. They can't get groceries, and take care of things. They're trying to be helpful. I've seen stories online of a young person who wrote a thank you letter to her mail carrier and got 200 letters from mail carriers in response because they were so grateful for her gratitude. I've seen people delivering chocolates or coffees to first responders in hospitals. I mean, I think you have to, just like any other time in your life, generosity and giving back is a protective factor. But I don't want to give prescriptions to people of this is what you should do, because it has to be something that resonates with you authentically, or it's not going to be a protective factor. So if you have the means and you're interested in making a donation somewhere, you can do that. If you want to be an activist, you can look into organizations that you can join that are doing activist work right now or raising funds for the organizations that are supporting families through this pandemic. But I would encourage proactive leaning into that, the existential questions that lead us to this gnawing lack of meaning and value. Lean into that and seek and strive, right? And I often talk about how, humans are happiest when we're striving for things, but we have to strive from a place of being content with where we are. So I will be okay if nothing changes, and I would like to do this, rather than if I can't do this, I'm going to be really miserable. So finding a way to use some of the tools that we've talked about today to lean into what you're feeling and start to calm your nervous system, as well as striving towards something that's going to give you a sense of value and purpose. And having conversations maybe with your peers or with the adults in your life about what are some of the problems that you'd like to try to help solve. What are some of the things, the articles that you're reading and the topics that are tugging at your heartstrings or making you feel angry because you want to change it? But again, I'm always hesitant to give prescriptions for things, because I could give you breathing exercises and places to go volunteer, but it's got to be an intrinsic place of motivation, and therefore it has to feel authentic.
Yeah, and I love that, like just helping kids maybe find their passion and then letting that kind of guide that. I have a third grader who got a 3D printer for his birthday right before all this happened, and the food workers in our district have still been giving out meals, and he chose to make 3D masks or the like shields for them. So that was super cool. So yeah. I think that's great advice, and finding that passion to help feel like you're contributing in some way.
And so can I say one more thing about that, Randy?
Sure.
I also want to note that we can be of service in our families. So it doesn't have to even be outside the house. If you have young children especially, I mean, reminding them that your family is a community and that they can find a sense of purpose and give back within the home, and giving them ideas of how they can do that.
It's a great idea. We're getting ready to remodel our kitchen, so my 11-year-old can have at it. He'll like the demo part of it.
It's basically like dressing up chores, but
right. No, but I love that. I think that's also a great perspective. So we are going to honor one more Facebook question, and then we're going to go and let you talk about your business and what you do, and give you a few minutes to share that with us, and then we'll wrap it up for the evening, because we've gone a little bit over, but I think the information you've shared has been so helpful, and I think everybody's feeling thankful for and grateful for what you had to share. So the last question, and this is really timely as well. If a child has had a previous fear of illness during this time, obviously when it commands the news cycle and a lot of our conversations and what's happening in our life, do you have any advice for kids with maybe a previous fear of illness?
Yeah, again, it goes back to empowerment. I mean, I think teach them about how their brain works. Teach them that this is fight, flight, freeze, this is rest and digest, and that this is where our bodies stay healthy. And that the best thing that they can do to stay healthy is not to be in fear all the time, but rather to learn how to recognize when they're in this state, and learn what tools, what sources of strength will help them to be able to settle into that feeling and re-engage their prefrontal cortex, so that their body can do what it naturally does, which is fight off illness as best as it can. And, use that information too to empower them in the choices of what they put in their bodies. When my daughter is eating a lot of sugar, what I talk to her about is how sugar actually can cause inflammation, and that inflammation can lead to a whole host of challenges. I don't just say sugar's bad for you. So we want to give kids information and empower them to look through different lenses and make different choices, because they are making those choices, not because we're telling them, oh, you're fine, don't worry, or just eat this food and then you'll be healthy. We really want to engage them as partners in that process.
I love that. It's like we talked about earlier, age-appropriate truth and giving kids the information that they need to help make those decisions for themselves and have empowerment and make those decisions. That's great.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, Jenny, I think it has been a great inaugural Facebook Live, and you've shared so much great information. And I know I'm going to take a whole bunch of your tidbits and information to my practice with my kiddos and in my household. So I really appreciate what you had to share. And you have so many people on here who are thanking you for your information and loving what you had to share. And we are so happy to have all our viewers. And I'm going to invite you to go ahead and share your slide again so that you can share your business with us. And then we'll let everybody get on with their evening.
Great. So I'll just let you know that I spent about 15 years working in schools as a mental health crisis interventionist. And it was during that work that I became involved in Sources of Strength when I was working at Fairview High School in Boulder Valley School District. And about 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to start a private practice, but really wanted to continue doing the prevention work of Sources of Strength. And so I created my business, Karuna Healing, which is really a health and wellness business that incorporates my private psychotherapy practice, which is located in Louisville, although right now it's located online. Someday I'll get to go back to my wonderful office. And it's also a business through which I do my presentations and workshops and trainings. And I also teach yoga. I've been teaching yoga at Soul Tree Yoga in Lafayette for the last 5.5 years. And the next 3 Wednesday nights are my last 3 classes with Soul Tree. So if you're interested in joining me, you can go to soultreecolorado.com. It's SOULTREE Colorado.com and register for the restorative class on Wednesday nights. All of my teaching proceeds for the next 3 classes are going to the fund that BVSD and Impact on Education put together to provide food and resources to families in need in BVSD. And then we've already donated $150 from the last 3 classes. So anyone who wants to practice with me, next 3 Wednesdays, May 20th is my last class. And I also make essential oil blends for anxiety and for depression, and all that information is on my website. So my website's pretty comprehensive. It includes my upcoming events. I am not good at blogging on my website, so I blog through my Karuna Healing Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook and you like my page, I do an almost weekly blog. Sometimes I skip weeks like this week because of the presentation. But I'd love to have you like my page and be able to follow what I'm talking about and where I'm appearing, and just shout out and say hello. And if you saw this presentation and want to let me know what you thought, I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome, Jenny. Thank you so much for everything tonight, and for being our first person and having the courage to go out there and give it a try. So we appreciate it, and we hope that everybody watching did too. And just a real quick shout out for next week. Next Tuesday, we'll be on with Mark Hess. He is a gifted program specialist in Colorado Springs, and he's going to be talking about growing up gifted and Generation Z. And parents, that's going to be a little bit of chat about screen time. So we'll see you here, same time, same place next week.
Mark Hess is a friend of mine, and he's brilliant. So definitely tune in.
We are super excited. So I think you've set the bar pretty high, though, Jenny. Thank you so much.
Andy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm going to signing off. We'll see you next week.
All right. Take